Okay, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. We're absolutely thrilled. And I am going to shock all of our listeners by opening with a question about magical creatures. For me, one of the great delights of House of the Dragon season 1 was its active embrace of the fantasy elements of the tale, from dragon dreams to dragon claiming and riding. We get to see Aemon claim Vhagar. We get to watch Daemon sing a lullaby to Vermithor. Wondering a couple things here. Does your own fandom make examining and centering these elements of the lore more exciting and more crucial to you? And then how do you think about finding the marriage of mythology and theme? Because that was one of our favorite parts of the first season too. Like, I think my favorite example from season 1 would be Viserys's warning to Rhaenyra in the first episode, the idea that we control the dragons is an illusion, building toward Vhagar disobeying Aemon as she eats Arax like a fun-sized Halloween candy. Starting the dance. Tough one for all involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think I bring my love of sort of weird fiction into this. It's kind of inseparable, I think, from being a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire. And what I love about the original books and the way George introduced the fantasy was after he sort of hits you in the face with it with the prologue of the first book, where you meet the White Walkers beyond the wall and the undead. But clearly in that meeting, that's all new news to all those the Rangers, Waymar Royce, and all those guys that are out there. So you know that it's not, this is not an everyday event for them either. It seems like for them it's like a boogie monster coming to life. And then after that, there really is nothing or very little. Maybe it's hinted at, and it seems like maybe Varys had, there was some magic done earlier in his life, but you're constantly questioning yourself: if does magic exist in this world or does it not? As he kind of turns the genre on its ear, and then 3 books later, you have direwolves warging, you have face changing assassins, fire magic, shadow babies, dragons are reborn, but all these things are they're slowly and very, very methodically introduced, and there's a cost to all of them. It's not this world of sort of free magic and very, very high fantasy. And it just reminded me of very much of Robert E. Howard and Conan the Barbarian, which is a favorite of mine from way back in the day when I was reading Tolkien and everything as a high school kid. So yes, I wanted to imbue this world with that. It's in a way, it's a bit more challenging because everyone laughs when I say this, but House of the Dragon is not does not happen in a as accessibly a fantasy world or readily fantasy world as the original Game of Thrones does, because we don't have the undead and skin changers and fire magic. We have dragons. We have 17 dragons, and that is the big magic in the world. But all of that magic exists, and we know from the original books that dragons leaving the world meant that magic largely left the world. So in theory, in this time, magic is even stronger than it was in Daenerys and Jon Snow's time. So I wanted to figure out ways to bring that in, but also make it feel like it did in my first experience of reading the books. And I think a good example of that is what we did with the dragon dreams and the prophecy, and the White Hart story in episode 3. And look, what do you believe? That's just they just saw a white deer, or whether that's magical and mystical. I think it's part of the fun of this world. It is not ever totally spelled out for you, the magic elements, and and I think anyway, those are the things that I kind of love about this, and makes this. That's what makes this not just another sort of Tudors series of a bunch of people with British accents fighting over a throne. That's what makes this world unique, and I want to lean into that.
I want to ask you a bit about like pushing that even further in season 2, because there was a lot of talk of dreams, but not a lot of talk of not a lot of surreality in the first season. But things we love about the original Thrones are like the sequence of the House of the Undying, like this idea of dreams and surreality. And I know that Matt has been talking in interviews about sort of the odder shape of the season for his storyline. So I was wondering if you could talk about that at all, about the idea of like where you draw the line in terms of how magical to go.
Yeah, I think it's you're walking in constant balance because you don't ever want it to feel like it's everywhere and all the time. And I think one of the good rules to follow is that when you introduce something like that, the way to make it feel special and unique, even within this world, where characters I think generally accept that some level of magic does exist, or things that the supernatural that they cannot explain. When it's happening to them and they're freaked out by it, then I think you're saying, just like I did the example with the White Walkers from the prologue of A Game of Thrones. Those characters were freaked out about that, and it made it feel special and unique, even with a world where we're like kind of accepting that magic exists. So I want to let everybody have kind of a pure experience and read of the season. But yes, I think we've done a good job of texturing and layering this world with some more of those elements, while also staying true to the kind of accepted, I would say, magic systems, for lack of a better word, that George has already established.
So Joanna's dream is to become a witch, as you might have gleaned.
Great.
It's true.
Our shared dream is to spend time thinking about the stories that we love and what we would build if we got to play in these well-tended and well-loved sandboxes. So, of course, we have to ask you about getting to adapt a George R.R. Martin text. And part of what has been so fun and interesting for us as book readers is that we actually don't know what's going to happen because, of course, Fire and Blood is full of these competing tales from unreliable narrators. So when you're going from page to screen, how are you deciding which little kernel to make a meal out of, which offhand mention can become a real plot driver, when maybe an assumed historical fact in the text, like, say, Leonor's death in Fire and Blood, will be revealed as something else entirely, a secret escape on the open sea? And then, most crucially, like, how do you decide whether to align your canon with Mushroom, Eustace, Munkin, or none at all? Is there an unreliable narrator's account that you're inclined to put the most stock into?
I don't think there's just to answer the last question first. I don't think so. I think we just try to find our way through the narrative in the most, I think the most interesting way possible is simply put. And now that we've spent a lot of time with these individual characters, and the characters, as we write and spend time with them, tend to evolve, I think we use the characters as guidance for how to get through the history. So it's a lot of times it's playing on, well, we know our show version of Alicent, say, like, and what would show Alicent do most likely in this situation, and then we look at the history and see how the history interpreted it, and try to play with that. So we're trying to walk you through this history in a way where people can interact with the sort of book written history and say, oh, I can see how a historian writing about this event 20 years after it happened with the court records would be able to put it back together in this way. But I can see how the thing that I just watched happen in live real time could get interpreted that way 20 years on. So I think some things are just exactly as they're written in the book. And that's the fun of it, is like, as with, I imagine, real medieval history, some things we have right and other things we are totally way off on. And until we invent time travel and can go back there, like in Michael Crichton's timeline, we won't have an accurate retelling of the history. And that's what we really want as writers. Sarah Hess and I, my writing partner, we really want this show to be not just a didactic retelling of the history. We want it to be accurate and faithful, but we want it to be a companion piece to the book, so that even people that have read the book can be satisfied in the experience of watching the show and saying, oh, that's interesting how they've taken this accepted event and then spun it, but I can see how the history was accurate, or it was mostly accurate, but this little element was off, or they got it totally wrong. But this thing that happens 3 moves down the road still happens because all the other events lined up. And if you look at these 3 guys as trying, Mushroom aside, Mushroom is very much his own case.
Yeah, my favorite.
We're team Mushroom over here.
Very good. Yeah, I've said I want to see
Mushroom, who was not there.
Yeah.
I want to see the later spinoff the show that's like a very adult animated series where they just do the mushroom version of everything through this entire history.
We're ready.
Absolutely. No notes.
But like Eustace and Munkin, they're trying to put this thing back together, and then Gildane on top of it is the poor guy that's sifting through all these things, trying to write this history. And we also imagine that there's, in some way, even if there's not a kind of naked agenda, there is an agenda in the writing of this history. And it feels, if you read the pages, is this sort of underlying take on this, where you could say that there are these, again, mushroom aside, there are these two men who wrote these accounts and a third man who are all kind of in service of a more orderly world that's outside of the Targaryen Empire, that are kind of trying to make sense of and place blame for the war that kind of ended all wars in Westeros. This world-changing war that took all the dragons off the table. And if you read it with that bent, and I'll let people interpret what that means. It opens up an entirely new and interesting interpretation of what goes on in Fire and Blood. And that's what we love about the book, and what we think is so brilliant about it is it really is a very unique piece of material to adapt. Because if you take a novel, you can't, you're either adapting the novel or you're doing you're doing your own version of it. You're taking another direction. I think there's variations on like how faithful an adaptation is to a novel, and we know changes are made for all different reasons. Whereas there's this kind of like living conversation between the show and the book. And I hope that, I've always said that I hope that people who read the book that come to the show, it can deepen their enjoyment of both, and vice versa. So if you've watched the show and then you go back and read the book, hopefully it deepens your enjoyment of reading the book and shows you new layers of the show that maybe you wouldn't have seen unless you had read the book. That's my hope. Lofty goals.
No, I completely agree. And I think, you're leaving it open to interpretation. So I will say my interpretation of part of what you're talking about is it's three men pinning the blame for this war on two women, right? That's part of it. There's a lot of other factors involved. That's part of it. And I think the smartest adapted choice that you and your writers made in the first season was the friendship between Rhaenyra and Alicent, and how that sort of burbles underneath everything, which is completely different from the account that we get in the book. I was wondering if that is your favorite adaptive change, or if you have a different adaptive change that you're sort of proudest of.
Yeah, I mean, that one was, I think, pretty readily apparent in the early days as we were trying to figure out how to create a dynamic between Alicent that would lead to surprise instead of just, if they hated each other right out of the gate, it doesn't give you many places to run. But we it sort of started with, well, hey, what if they were a little more contemporary in age? Because, in the book, I think Alicent her age is listed as a bit older than Rhaenyra. Not that really matters, and we also meet Rhaenyra at this point in the timeline when she's older versus being literally a child, which makes her more have more, sort of agency and direction in life, and driving her parents more crazy than she would probably as an 8-year-old. So that was more, there was something that was, I think, apparent as you get into the material of like, if we're going to frame the show around these two women, how do we make it dynamic and interesting? So definitely very proud of that. I think the take on Viserys as a character, which again, a direct reading of Viserys in the book is the show is completely faithful to that, because all of the elements of Viserys that escape the history are the kind of contradictory elements about him, and the things that you would not be in the court record. It would just be like, oh, it's this guy that kind of likes tourneys and feasts, and he tries not to rock the boat too much when he's making choices. But then when you hear him in these private bedchamber conversations with Rhaenyra, and then later with Alicent as his wife, you see how conflicted this guy is, because he's carrying the secret around. And it really deeply kind of nuances the decisions that he's making, and this promise that he made, that almost to a detriment to himself and the realm, to keep the realm at peace. He's taken it on like this millstone about his neck. So he won't even in many ways won't even discipline his own daughter or properly deal with his insane brother and the chaotic force that he is within his reign. So I mean, those are the two things that leap out to me. I mean, I think we're trying, my hope is that we're not making radical changes in the books. I mean, I think everybody's going to come to this with their own interpretation of what that word means in terms of an adaptation. But the fun for us is trying to render a very faithful adaptation of this story with surprising twists and variations on it that hopefully make the show a another layer, an interesting layer of of this storyline, and gives people that are so familiar with the book in the end surprises to find as you go on, and a reward for spending all this time on their couch engaging with our show.
Building off of Alicent and Rhaenyra, who were obviously such a dynamic and magnetic scene pairing in season 1, the dragons are dancing, which means that many of the characters who played off of each other in season 1 are now forced apart by the story, either because a fixture like Viserys, you were just chatting about, and his rotting limbs and his golden face mask are no longer in the mix, or because the ratcheting up of the War of Succession just definitionally separates people who used to share a room in season 1. Alicent and Rhaenyra are figureheads of the opposing sides. Daemon and Rhaenyra are both Team Black, but Daemon ends season 1 by declaring his intention to go seek out a toehold in the Riverlands. So did you meet this structural reality that is present and inextricable, really, from the nature of the story as a chance to just keep season after season unearthing new, fresh magic between newer character pairings? Or does this feel like a real challenge that you have to try to creatively solve against, or both? Are those things not mutually exclusive?
I mean, I think part of the gift that I think the expanding narrative of both Game of Thrones books give you, meaning the original series and Fire and Blood, is that you start with everybody under one roof in times of general peace, and then a hand grenade is kind of dropped into the mix and scatters everybody in the form of war kicking off. We meet all the Starks living together under the same roof in the original books, and then we get to know this family and care about each one of them, and then we follow them as they go on their various adventures, and some of them will encounter each other again in different when they're different people, and others will never see each other again, very sadly, in the future narrative. So I think we kind of use that as that's a great storytelling mode, because it makes you realize how precious this time is that these characters that you love have together, and you don't know whether they're going to see each other again. One could march off and die, or just the circumstances of the war could mean that it doesn't bring them back together, or doesn't bring them back together within the bookended narrative of our show. So I think we lean into that, and sending characters on their diaspora in this story is part of the way you introduce new characters, because when Daemon goes to a new place, we care about Daemon, we know Daemon, so we're in his point of view, so we're interested in the people that he's going to meet and encounter along the way, and that's how you engage with this new layer of characters. And I think, again, Thrones did the same thing in the original series. Every series that came along, every season that followed the first, you would meet more and more new characters, but you would usually meet them at least starting in the POV of a character that you already knew and followed and cared about. So it's this clever way that all these little dots are connected, and by the end you have this really rich tapestry of people that then you have to kill off in order to have a manageable narrative to tell and bring it back around to the end. But very simply, part of the fun of a Game of Thrones narrative is taking these characters, meeting them together, loving them and loving their relationship, blowing them apart through the circumstances of the world, sending them on their various adventures, and then wanting or willing them to find their way back to each other. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't.
Right. Speaking of new characters, Mallory and I are huge Slow Horses fans, huge fans of The Great, so we are thrilled that Freddie Fox is in the cast this season.
My guy.
I'm a huge Tom Bennett fan, Love and Friendship. I think he's one of the funniest people alive. So I was wondering
Love
if
Tom.
I was wondering if the introduction of these like more comedically gifted actors, Freddie Fox as Gawain Hightower, Tom Bennett as Ulf White, is intentional as the war ramps up and things get naturally like more horrific, more bloodthirsty, stuff like that. Are you like, let's lighten the tone a little by bringing like, not that season 1 didn't have its own laughs, but like bringing people like Freddie and Tom into the mix?
For sure. I mean, I think a lot of the humor, the inherent humor in the original books and in Game of Thrones is by finding these kind of cultural clashes and then putting them together. Bronn and Tyrion is a great example. Sandor Clegane and anybody in the world. And that is where you extract humor. And as the world gets darker, the opportunity for gallows humor just increases. So I think yes, we are definitely we want to find those moments of levity in the show, but it's about earning them so it doesn't feel like you're winking into the camera or breaking the bond that you have with the audience and the agreement that everybody in this show doesn't know that they're in a Game of Thrones show. For them, this is very real, and they're not able to make quips about dragon puns as the dragon is descending and trying to burn their army. It's just that's not the tone of our show. So it's finding gifted actors like Tom, like Freddie, and bringing them into the mix because those cultural and Gawain Hightower, who's that we kind of cast as a man of great privilege who grew up at whatever the equivalent of boarding school would have been at Old Town, and then you thrust him into a world where he has to salute a guy like Kristen Cole, who he regards as the the help who got promoted up to Lord
Right.
Commander of the Kingsguard. There are really fun dynamics that come from those relationships, and Tom Bennett in any situation is just funny. Yes, more of that. I mean, Daemon will continue to have very acid things to say to people and not particularly care about their responses to it. I think we landed some good funny this season. Tom Glencarney is hilarious. I don't know if anybody's prepared for how funny he is and how he can take an expected thing and spin it. But yeah, I mean that's as the stakes get higher, it's almost easier to make a joke out of it because it's just a way of releasing the tension out of a very tense situation.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Daemon. Let's
let's
build from laughter to black hearts here. You have spoken in other interviews about the surprise that you felt in season 1 regarding Daemon's just embrace by the viewing public as like the internet's bad boyfriend. This podcast is one where Daemon is a patron saint of the problematic fave. And so we really wanted to ask you about this because for us, he is not a hero. He is this deeply flawed character who often gravely errs and dismays us, but we find ourselves like so drawn to him and pulled in to watch every decision that he makes and everything he does. Just find him so utterly compelling. In the wake of season 1, you almost seemed dismayed that some slices of the fandom viewed him less as this like gray, messy magnet and more as just like outright hero. How top of mind was that, and mining and examining and centering the elements of Daemon's character that you consider like essential and true as you set about structuring and writing season 2?
I mean, to be clear, just to clear the record, I'm in no way surprised that people are fascinated by Daemon. I mean,
yes, of course.
It's a fascinating character with many layers and twisted corners to explore. And Matt Smith's performance is incredibly charismatic and magnetic. I mean, Matt just beams charisma. It's hard not to be glued to Daemon when he's on the screen, when Matt is performing him. I totally understand that. There was a sort of subsect of followers that seemed to see Daemon as this like patron saint of this world and kind of infallible, and everything that he did, including putting his hands on his own wife / niece, was justified or somehow a way of trying to, I don't know, diminish him as a character. when the real answer is no, he's a deeply broken person. And while he can be fascinating and capable of moments of great honor and heroism, he's also capable of moments of great monstrosity. And I don't think he's he's not a straight villain character. To me, he is the classic anti-hero in this world. He's deeply conflicted and layered, and you can in one episode go through an experience where you're rooting for Daemon to kill everybody in the room, and then at the end going like, what have I done? Who have I sided with? Where am I? And that's the experience that we want people to go through with a lot of the characters in this show. We don't want anybody to portray a pure hero or a pure villain. I mean, of course, there are people that sort of, trend in either direction, but the George always talks about this is a world of archetypes with where you make gray characters. You take the expected archetype, the way Jaime Lannister was the Lancelot archetype, and then you turn it on its ear, and you make it a surprising character. And we start with Jaime being fascinated and loving him, and then he throws a child out the window, and you're like, well, that's it. How can I ever like this guy? He's the great villain of the series. And then he gets his hand chopped off. He gets his great skill taken away from him, and 2 books later, he's one of the most purely empathic characters in the book. And that's the kind of experience that we want to, not necessarily with Daemon, but we want to take people on in these character arcs in the show. You're going to be watching these characters over multiple seasons. You have to go through sort of peaks and valleys with them. So my only surprise was how there were a not insignificant percentage of the audience that was willing to make an excuse for anything that Daemon did to justify his heroism. That to me felt surprising.
We do love a character on an arc.
Love a character on an arc, Jill.
We do.
We both have paintings in our respective homes of Jaime knighting Brienne. So what painting of Daemon will we end up with? Who can say?
Who can say?
We'll find out.
There's so many.
Speaking of our favorite sickos, I was listening to your interview with our pals over on the History of Westeros podcast, and you were describing Larys as detached from human emotions, which I consider you doing me a favor and opening up a door for me to talk about foot stuff. And my question to you about Larys, who I love, is if he is someone who is detached from human emotion, is his exchanges with Alicent about power and control something more directly connected to his own physiology, or is there actual desire in the mix there?
I mean, I think it's a complicated spectrum of things, but I think, that situation in season 1 was definitely about power and control. I mean, that's what that scene was supposed to be, and it was supposed to be, I think, not on the nose about it, but I think it was supposed to be knowing what we knew about Larys and where Alicent was at her point in the story, which at her kind of zenith of power. That was should have read to most people, I think, as a quote unquote power move. That is Larys showing his power to somebody who everybody else in the story and the world regards as incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. I love him.
He's a delight. Matt Needham is just wonderful. We have many of these actors on the show, but he's just one of those actors that you can give a breakfast menu to, and he can make a Shakespearean plot out of it.
We are very excited to spend more time with Larys in season 2. We're very excited to travel elsewhere in season 2, beyond the Red Keep, beyond Dragonstone. Larys might be sad to discover that it's cold up north. A lot of boots and stockings on the feet, not as much visible flesh. But we did want to ask you about the widening of the world in the north in particular. So in season 1, Rhaenyra and her war council are sketching out their plans to recruit new allies, and they're doing so while standing over the painted table, which, by the way, looked amazing. Just dynamite illuminated in season
incredible.
1. It's absolutely incredible. So this is not only, of course, a reminder of this burden that Rhaenyra has inherited to protect the realm, but just felt like a nice wink to us as viewers about how much bigger the story was about to get in season 2. So Jace's mission is to head to the Eyrie and then head to Winterfell. The trailers have given us these the precious little glimpses of the wall and the north. Joanna and I freaked out when we got to see the ice and the pommel. It was wonderful. We've seen Brackens and Blackwoods in the trailer. We've done a lot of like sigil spotting. We're having fun. So in addition to the literal battles and showdowns that just traversing Westeros during the dance will of course spawn, what did widening the scope of the map beyond King's Landing and Dragonstone to include, not only more locations and houses, but also small folk, people outside of a seat of power, unlock for you and your team from a storytelling perspective? And then in particular, what was it like to write material for the Starks and the North, given Game of Thrones fans and viewers just deeply entrenched emotional attachment to that slice of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody will see fairly quickly in the season that the scope and scale of the world expands rather quickly. We've had at the end of the first season, a king died, a throne was stolen, and a dragon ate another dragon. So the dominoes have started falling in a big way, which means that everybody has to kind of scramble to their corners and start trying to raise armies and alliances in their favor, which means that we get to very naturally broaden out the world again through characters that we've already met in season one, which I think is always the best way to do it, the most natural, organic way to do it. So it's a thrill. I mean, it's such a deeply realized world that it's great fun to both take people, I think, back to places that they might recognize from the prior series, and then take them to new places where maybe you touched on or were mentioned or weren't mentioned at all in the original series, and introduce these new worlds, which they're all their own characters, and the people who populate them are very different based on what region they come from and what gods they salute and all those things. And then, as I mentioned before, the kind of the differences in the social strata as we talked about, and having those cultures kind of clash. So it actually presents an opportunity to do all those things, which I'm very excited about, because I think you will feel as soon as a few episodes into the season, you will feel, oh, this is a much bigger tapestry than we were playing on season one, when everybody was kind of landlocked to King's Landing or Driftmark or Dragonstone, or one of the three. So it's we've expanded, we've done it organically. Yes, one of the places we go to is in the north. I'm excited for people to see that. It was great fun. I mean, it's a moment where you can do a nice moment of fan service for all of the many millions of fans that very kindly followed our show. Thank you for all of that. But also do it in an organic way that honors what's in the book and also propels the story forward. And those are always things that I'm a fan of doing. I worry about things like terms like fan service, Easter eggs. Those things all kind of make me feel icky a bit as a writer. But when there are opportunities to do it that feel satisfying, not just on a sort of visceral level, but satisfying on a deep, dramatic, resonant level, then I'm all about them. And I think going up north was a great example of that.
I know that it's not your job to put together the ad campaign for any given season of your show. But we've been having a lot of fun talking about this sort of Team Black versus Team Green ad campaign that HBO has put together for the season, because the question a lot of people have is like, how do you root for Team Green? Does it bother you at all? Do you care how much easier it is, at least so far in the story, to root for Team Black? Does it matter to you if the sympathies are balanced between the both sides? Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Yes, thankfully they don't ask me to do the marketing, because I don't know that I'd be very good at selling my own show, and it's one responsibility that's taken off my plate in the making of this, which I'm grateful for. No, look, I get the reason why they did it. It's a brilliant campaign because it really does activate engagement and all those things that they're looking for. It's a clear message, black and green, and it's unique to the show. All those things that has going for it. I think we as dramatists are looking for a more nuanced reading of the conflict, where, I mean, hopefully if we've done our job, hopefully it's hard to find one side to throw all in with, because of the complexities on either side of the equation. I think there are people on both sides that you would say, oh yeah, I think they would make a good sovereign. And then there are people on both sides where you're like, I don't want them anywhere near the throne. And that's the fun of it, is like finding individuals to root for and making it complicated for you to say, throw all in and say like, yeah, I don't know that I totally want Rhaenyra to take the throne, because that means that, Daemon is at her, at her side. And what does that mean for the realm? And what does that mean for Rhaenyra? Like, is he purely seeking to put her on the throne or so that he can be close to it, or try to snatch back what he feels Viserys took from him? And I think those feelings can change as the story evolves. And the same with Aegon. I mean, you'll see him in episode 1, like trying to be king and doing a job of like trying to learn the job on the job. And he might not be suited right out of the box, but I think Tom Glencarny in his great portrayal of him makes for this very empathetic character, and I think it will complicate people's feelings about where they stand in all this. And I think that's what makes for a long running television series that's engaging and causes a lot of online debates and podcasts and all those things that we want to happen about the show. We're not looking for the pure sort of Justice League versus the team of baddies kind of reading of this. If that happens, I think we're not doing our job.
We'd like to thank the marketing team for allowing us to do a 2.5-hour dueling trailer breakdown after the
thank you for that.
green and black trailers were released. Thank
Bless you guys.
Thank you. Yes.
We have to be ourselves. We can only be us.
Yeah, we do. Much like the characters in your story, we can only be us. Maybe your answer to this question is going to be Team Green. Maybe your answer to this question is going to be Team Black. Maybe it's going to be Team Gray. But did you have a favorite character to write for this season? Like this season in particular. Maybe it's the same as your answer overall when you're thinking about the story. But is there one character who you were like most enticed by and pulled toward?
I mean, as I always say, it's like picking a favorite child. It's it's.
But everybody has a favorite child, don't they?
Do they?
Mallory.
I mean, I don't have kids.
I mean, it's a cliche answer. I mean, we really do like writing for everybody. I mean, the thing is, with the dynamics that we set up in season 1, I mean, everybody does present an interesting corner of, way into this world. I will say in season 2, I'm most excited for the fans to get to enjoy the next generation, the kids, so to speak. When I say kids, I mean, the teenagers and young 20-somethings that are now responsible for prosecuting this war that their parents and grandparents started. But we've known Aegon and Aemond and Helena and Jace and Baela and Rhaena as characters, and also as wonderful people and wonderful young talented actors for a long time now. And now that we barely got to write for them in season 1, and the tantalizing experience of writing for them in like an episode and a half each, and seeing what they can do on screen really excited us and really drove the writing, I think, in season 2 in a great way. So I'm excited for people to see all the great things that we were able to do in season 2. When you got this little teaser of them in season 1, you're like, oh, that's fantastic. And then just being able to write these three-dimensional stories for each of those characters, that was deeply satisfying. And it also a new wrinkle, a new layer. I mean, everybody loves writing a great sort of acid quip for Daemon, but writing for Aegon this year, and writing more stories for Helena and for Aemond and for Jace, who plays a major role this year. And then also Baela and Rhaena, like that stuff was all really, really satisfying. So how's that for an answer?
But in season 1, your answer would have been Beesbury, right?
So Bill Patterson, legend.
Joanna's absolute favorite. Yeah. He's boy. We have a lot of Beesbury lines on our soundboard. Our soundboard is just
bees all the way up and down the board. We love Beesbury.
Very good. He was so fun to write for and so fun to have on the show.
I heard you reference the Force when you were talking about Star Wars and the Force, when you were talking about sort of the idea of the different degrees of strength of connection between dragon and a dragon rider and dragon. And I was curious if you had some other, I mean, you already mentioned Conan as a foundational text for you, but if you have other sort of classic, this is like a classic Ringerverse question, like classic sci-fi or fantasy stories that are top of mind to you. You mentioned Tolkien too, a favorite of ours, obviously. Like
when you're always welcome.
Yeah, when you're processing House of the Dragon, like what are some of the other big mythologies that you're thinking of when you're making sense of this story?
I mean, I think I've always been interested in Arthurian mythology generally, not any one specific writer or scholar's take on it, but just Arthurian mythology as a whole. Certainly, Joseph Campbell, the hero of, 1,000 Faces or 10,000 Faces. How many thousand faces? Is it 10,000? It's 10,000. Yeah, I mean, classic literature. I mean, I was a student of Dune. Certainly, certainly growing up. Not
here.
that necessarily impacts on this. Yeah, I mean, I read all the same things that I think a lot of science fiction and fantasy literature fans did growing up and kind of finding my way through. And I also, it led me to reading a lot of medieval history because I just became fascinated with the allegories that George was using in the writing of A Song of Ice and Fire. So I would go back and I would read a book about the War of the Roses. I read a book about the anarchy and the making of this show, which is all that stuff is all deeply fascinating. But yeah, I mean, look, I've spent a long time with my nose buried in a book, and also buried in movies and things like that. And I think you end up drawing from all places. But the nice thing about being sort of immersed in all of this is that I think once you are a student of it, you can start turning things on their ear and running against the grain of expectation. And the reason that so many images from Tolkien, for instance, have become cliche in the way that they've been turned around and spun so many times is because Tolkien was so singularly great, and so many people were inspired and drew off of that. But I think you have to be able to take that thing and turn it on its ear. I mean, one of the things I remember laughing out loud when reading A Game of Thrones for the first time and thinking, being lulled in and thinking it was a fantasy book, and then you read a bunch of chapters that just seems to be like a sort of Tudor's kind of palace intrigue story.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, George introduces a dwarf character and you're like, oh, this is fascinating. And then you realize in the reading of the chapter is like, no, he literally means a little person, but he's playing with I'm reading a fantasy book and this is how I'm reading this as like, oh, a take on Gimli. But then you realize like, oh, Tyrion is actually, burdened by his stature, literal and figurative in this world because of the way people look at people that aren't, don't fit the normative sort of, picture of a person, and how it's inspired him to have to use his, his brain and his mind. And like, you realize in the reading of that one chapter, how he has taken the sort of, Gimli trope and just created a timeless, fascinating character in one chapter, has done that. And those are the things that I think, just steeping yourself in these worlds can lead you to inspiration, hopefully like that.
Amazing.
Love that.
I love it.
Okay, if you have 2 more minutes, we want to end with like a lightning round. Just
2 questions.
Couple rapid fire 2 questions.
Okay, cool.
Boy, Joe, you go first. I don't know which one I want to ask yet.
Okay. If you were to get merch with one house sigil on it, I mean, I'm sure you have plenty of merch at your fingertips, but if you were to get merch with one house sigil on it and you can't pick the Targaryens, which house do you choose?
I like the Velaryons. I'm fascinated with them as a house, just because in this period they're so powerful, and then in the original books they're kind of a footnote, and by the time we get to the world of Robert Baratheon, and you see how great houses can kind of rise and fall. And we spend a lot of time writing for the Velaryons in the show, and I love their whole story. I love the story of the Sea Snake, this guy that kind of comes in and takes this house that should be great because they have this Valyrian history, and maybe kind of fell a bit into I don't know, kind of decadence or sort of acceptance of the status quo. And then like he like went, put the world on his back and had these 9 voyages, and then built a castle, with his own strength and money. And I really like that particular character in this world. So I would say in our period, Velaryon.
Do you have an
Lovely
affinity?
color scheme as well.
Oh, I was going to say, do you have an affinity for him because he, like you, has like his treasures sort of planted around?
Oh,
his
absolutely.
You're in
You're in
was entirely inspired by my life.
Your merch collection.
Yes.
I love it. I'm going to keep a close eye out for some sort of like Lego assortment.
There's that too. There actually was a Conan sword buried in the Sea Snakes collection. It just never made it to screen. But the art department set decorator did that for, as a nod to me. So it was as if he had gone out to sea and found and met Conan and killed him, and then brought home his sword as a trophy.
I love this. Okay, speaking of swords, for my lightning round, a little bit of fun here. I'm going to do a classic House of R smuggle. Here we go.
Okay.
You knew I was going to, Joe. Couldn't help it. All right.
Iconic.
Dark Sister or Blackfire?
Dark Sister.
Viserys' crown or Aegon's crown?
Aegon's.
Dragon Orgy tapestries or 7 pointed stars?
Oh, Orgy Tapestry, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
Thank you for
That's
joining us
it.
today.
We did it.
Yeah.
We ended on dragon orgies, and that's exactly where we wanted to end. Thank you.
Mission accomplished.
Mhm.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Ryan. This was awesome. We really enjoyed chatting, and thank you so much for the time. We're hyped for season 2.
Thank you, guys. This was great. Great discussion.